Ladies and gentlemen, this next session is going to focus upon makerspaces and the law, thinking about a wide array of some of the legal issues related to the work of makerspaces, Fab Labs and innovation centres, but also some of the technologies that are used at such sites, including 3D printing and additive manufacturing and robotics. We're also keen on developing some of the ideas from the last session as well, and thinking about the role of 3D printing in terms of city building and pressing on beyond the role of 3D printing and the maker movement in terms of community building. We have a speaker who's going to explore some of the issues around maker cities and fab cities and smart cities. So our first speaker, Dr. Mohammed Zaheer Abbas, is a recent graduate from QUT Faculty of Law, having got his PhD looking at patent law and access to essential medicines. He just has a new position at QUT as a postdoctoral researcher under a QUT Edge grant, and that grant allows for an extension of our research on intellectual property and 3D printing into the Pacific context of COVID and all the various challenges posed in that context. So, Dr. Abbas.
Thank you so much, for Dr. Professor Matthew Rimmer, for your kind introduction. I'm Mohammed Abbas. Today I will be presenting on Fab Labs and 3D Makerspaces, role and patent infringement liability in response to COVID-19. In this presentation, I will cover what are makerspaces and Fab Labs, what is their importance in a health crisis like COVID-19, and then I will turn my attention to the legal issue of patent infringement liability of makerspaces, and finally I will discuss some of the key limitations of makerspaces. What are makerspaces? Makerspaces are settings to create, craft, explore, think critically, invent, and collaborate. These spaces provide a location for the development of partnerships, shared working, contemplation, and stimulation of creative ideas. The combination of technology and human creativity can help create a more productive communities. This is a very important point, but I will not discuss it further because this is not beyond the scope of the study. Most importantly, makerspaces have an empowering and enabling role by facilitating access to equipment and resources that many makers would otherwise never have. So they have the empowering and enabling role, which is the focus of this study. What are types of makerspaces? Primarily, there are two types of makerspaces: not-for-profit and for-profit. Not-for-profit community makerspaces, they provide the manufacturing equipment free of cost, but you have to pay for consumables like 3D printing filament, the printing materials. And for-profit makerspaces, they provide the same facilities, the equipment and resources, but you have to pay the membership fee. There are different names for makerspaces like hacker spaces, fabrication spaces, tech labs, DIY spaces, but they all mean the same thing. The common thread running through all of them is that they help people produce their own content through sharing of resources, information, and skills. Now, what are Fab Labs? Fab Labs is one category of makerspaces. It's a kind of makerspace that follows a charter and is governed by the Fab Lab, by the Fab Foundation. The idea of Fab Labs has its roots in the MIT's Center for Bits and Atoms. In 2001, MIT's Professor Neil Gershenfeld established guidelines for creating makerspaces. Under the clearly established guidelines, all Fab Labs have core set of tools including 3D printers, laser cutters, scanning tools to digitize objects. The number of Fab Labs in the world has been doubling approximately every 18 months for more than a decade. So consistently, they are expanding, And currently there are more than 2,000 Fab Labs worldwide. Because Fab Labs have a common software and equipment footprint, ideas developed in one Fab Lab can be applied across the networks. So the ideas can transfer very quickly from one part to the other part of the world. And it helped in the COVID response. Fab Labs played a key role in promoting the spirit of technological humanism. They produced face shields, visors for protective face masks, door openers, and eye protectors. As Sherry Leicester, President and CEO of Fab Foundation, said, "We want everyone to be well informed and using professional best practices in digital fabrication. This is a unique opportunity to help our communities in important ways and to demonstrate the potential of digital fabrication, how it brings social impact and how it supports humanitarian efforts." Why makerspaces are important in a health crisis like COVID-19? Number one, they promote collaboration and volunteerism. In response to COVID-19, makers in the US and other advanced countries, they were looking for opportunities to help. And then they realized that they could use a makerspace to get access to the resources to deliver the help they want to deliver. Makerspaces mobilize their resources to manufacture protective masks, face shields, emergency ventilators, and other safety equipment for healthcare workers and patients. And Makerspaces started coordinating efforts of local and regional networks through the Slack app and through social media platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook. Number two, community-driven distributed manufacturing is enabled by makerspaces. What is distributed manufacturing? Distributed manufacturing means that the products are not coming from the corporations, the users. They can manufacture products at the local level, at the city level, near to the point of use. Makers bring production back to the city where consumption occurs. This approach is important because global supply chains are prone to disruptions during a pandemic. There can be so many reasons that can disturb the global supply chains in a health emergency. About half of the world's face masks are manufactured in China. One can imagine the costs of delivery, times of delivery, and vulnerabilities of long-distance shipping to far-off countries. The distributed manufacturing eliminates the financial and environmental costs of cross-continent shipping of physical objects. So it's not only that it saves money, it also saves the planet. Responsiveness. 3D printing is also called rapid prototyping. Rapid prototyping because it's very quick to iterate and reiterate. If something is not working, you can quickly redesign, reiterate to reach the solution you are trying to reach. It's not possible in the traditional manufacturing because there are cumbersome processes involved, there are multiple skills involved, and there are needs for tooling and molding and costing, and there's need for external skill set, like you rely on a draftsperson, and it's a teamwork. But in 3D printing, you can quickly iterate and reiterate to develop the desired product. For instance, in Italy, Massimo, founder of Fab Lab Milano, in collaboration with two gentlemen, Christian and Alessandro, was able to deliver 3D printed ventilators valves to local hospital that had run out of supply. And within 3 hours of studying the valve, they were able to create a valve prototype within three hours. And in traditional manufacturing, it would take some weeks or even months. Adaptation to local needs. Makerspaces enable designing, customization, and fabrication of products by the individuals and communities for themselves in line with their specific needs. Maker culture is inherently linked with tinkering, an activity that is made possible through the availability of open source hardware, which enables people to locally adapt and replicate designs. Makers can adapt their designs not only to local needs, but also to local resource constraints. For instance, the dimensions of a face shield design can be adjusted according to changing availability of base materials. Now we turn our attention to the legal issue of patent infringement liability. In makerspaces, there is a potential for users to infringe on others' IP rights through illegal reproduction, replicating the designs that are protected under intellectual property laws. As functions of 3D printing continue to grow, users will have more opportunities to possibly infringe on others' IP rights. As regards copyright law, the position is very clear under the statute. In this section, I will be focusing on the US laws because it's beyond the scope of the study to look into multiple jurisdictions. In USA, Section 108 of the US Copyright Act stipulates that nothing in this section shall be construed to impose liability for copyright infringement upon a library or archives, or its employees for the unsupervised use of reproducing equipment located in its premises, provided that such equipment displays a notice that the making of a copy may be subject to the copyright law. So if you meet the two conditions, that the reproduction by users was unsupervised, and number two, that the manufacturing equipment has a notice pasted on it that that making of a copy may be subject to the copyright law, you are safe. There is no liability under this Section 108 of the US Copyright Act. In patent law, there is no such provision in any statute in the US. The patent law does not give an explicit safe harbor to libraries and makerspaces that offer unsupervised use of manufacturing equipment. There can be two possible ways to hold the makerspaces liable for patent infringement. Number one is contributory infringement, and number two is induced infringement. Contributory infringement liability is articulated by the statute. Whoever offers to sell or sells within the United States or imports into the United States of a component of a patented machine, manufacturer, combination, or composition, or a material or apparatus for use in practicing a patented process shall be liable as a contributory infringer. So under this provision, from the plain reading of this provision, we can see that makerspaces cannot be held liable for contributory patent infringement because making equipment available to users is provision of a service. It's not a sale or offer to sell. Another reason, makerspaces technologies are capable of substantial non-fringing uses. Like 3D printers, their primary purpose is not to infringe upon other people's intellectual property. They can be used in multiple ways for non-infringing uses. In 2011, the US Supreme Court held that liability for contributory infringement requires the proof that the defendant had prior knowledge of the patent in question. This judgment also favors the makerspaces. They can use their lack of knowledge as an excuse because makerspaces are not expected to have prior knowledge of the underlying patent, as they generally have no means to identify original works or to determine that a creation may potentially infringe on another's patent rights. It would place an unreasonable amount of burden on makerspaces if they have to closely examine patent claims covering every object being created on their premises. So it's not practically possible if the makerspaces are asked to look into each and every reproduction happening in their premises that it is covered under this and this patent claims. It's not practically possible for them, and they can use this as an excuse if they are held liable for contributory infringement. So under this form of infringement, they are safe because they are not selling, they are not offering for sale, there are non-infringing uses of their technologies, and they lack the knowledge of underlying patents. Number 2 is induced infringement liability. Induced infringement liability is also articulated by the statute. However, actively induces infringement of a patent shall be liable as an infringer under Section 271B of the US Patent Act. The United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit stated in 2007, under the plain language of the statute, a person who provides a service that assists another in committing patent infringement may be subject to liability under Section 271B for active inducement of infringement. So actively induces, inducement, these terms I will focus in the next slide. Induced infringement liability, however, requires knowledge of both the patent and the infringement. According to a judgment in the US, a person infringes by actively and knowingly aiding and abetting an other's direct infringement. Makerspaces may be held liable for induced infringement if they knowingly encourage others to infringe patents. It is, however, unlikely that makerspaces would intentionally undertake specific conduct to encourage the users to infringe on another's intellectual property. It doesn't make sense that they will intentionally encourage other people to infringe on other people's intellectual property. Proof of this sort of infringement is difficult as it requires a showing that the defendant had specific knowledge of the underlying patent as well as the intent to cause another to infringe upon the patent. It is implicit by the use of the phrase actively induces in the statute and active inducement in a court judgment that induced infringement liability cannot occur without specific intent. Intent is a very difficult element to prove in a court of law because it is locked inside the defendant's mind. So it's hard to prove intention. Okay, they are safe under both types of liability. They are safe under contributory infringement, they are safe under induced infringement, but still they need to take some precautionary measures to fend off lawsuits. Makerspaces may put notice or liability warning on all reproducing equipment or manufacturing equipment. The person using this equipment is liable for any infringement. This is very simple, but not all makerspaces have this policy of pasting this notice on their devices. In a user agreement, users may be required to sign a waiver releasing the makerspace from any liability. This can be another measure to indemnify themselves from the liability. Makerspaces may display acceptable use policies and a carefully drafted IP statement on premises as well as on their website. This is also very simple. You have to just draft your IP statement, make it display it on the wall of these premises and on your website if you have a website, but not all makerspaces have drafted their IP statement. And another important advice that makerspaces can minimize the level of knowledge or awareness of users' activity by not monitoring or supervising their use of the devices supplied. Without actual monitoring or supervising, it would be difficult for a plaintiff to demonstrate that the defendant is knowingly assisting infringers of the underlying patent. Limitations of makerspaces. Number one is Fab divide or digital divide. Lack of 3D printing ecosystem in the low and middle income countries should be a concern. It can be noted with caution that individuals and communities from low and middle income countries barely contributed 3D printed materials in response to COVID-19. We have so many examples of 3D printing communities' contributions towards COVID response, but only from technically and economically advanced countries. 4.2 billion people lack regular access to the internet. Billions of people in the resource-poor countries are excluded from digital fabrication because access to computing and the internet is a basic requirement to connect with the 3D printing community. Even in advanced countries, makerspaces are mainly found in large urban areas, in most cases in or around city centers. Innovative capabilities of a vast majority of population living in far-off areas, even in advanced countries, remain untapped. Number two, limited capability. Makerspaces for 3D printing are excellent for making small numbers of physical items. However, they are not able to handle large volume printing for mass production. They are not microfactories designed for sustained large-scale production. 3D printers are not fast as they rely on stepwise layer-by-layer approach to fabrication of objects, which inevitably takes time and is the main factor limiting the manufacturing capability of makerspaces. You can quickly make designs, you can quickly iterate and reiterate, but when it comes to printing, manufacturing, it takes a lot of time. Financial viability, makerspaces that have a social and non-profit approach are financially vulnerable. There is a need to develop a viable financial model to support community makerspaces because mere reliance on personal donations is not enough for their financial sustainability. Quality concerns, the maker movement introduces new challenges for the standardization of production, which is fundamental for ensuring the production of professional quality items. Regulatory standards for the production of medical supplies were developed with individual companies in mind and an assumption of traditional supply chains. So it's an important concern that needs to be addressed. Conclusion, human communities are most powerful when they work together. Makerspaces did a commendable job in empowering community participation. 3D printing technology is perfectly suited to a collaborative emergency response. Public policy decisions around makerspaces for 3D printing should be aimed at making this technology available for public use. Makerspaces are unlikely to be held liable for contributory or induced patent infringement. They, however, need to be vigilant in taking precautionary measures to fend off potential lawsuits. In order to prepare for a future pandemic, there is a need to address limitations of makerspaces and 3D printing technology. Thank you so much for your patience.